Welcome to Leadership Under the Microscope, a production of JR Global. Our current series is Leading in Crisis and focuses on how leaders react to and perform in time of turmoil. The emphasis today is on the arts and education sector. Here is your host, JR Klein.
The outbreak of the COVID pandemic has become a major disruption for colleges and universities around the world. It has forced them to rethink almost every aspect of their operating model. The pandemic has significantly altered nearly every aspect of university life, from admission to enrollments and instruction to athletics. These concerns extend to the financial future of higher education institutions in a time of financial instability, both in the form of unexpected costs and the potential reduction in revenues. Also, university campuses are places where students live and study in close proximity to each other. They are also buzzing cultural hubs where students are brought together from nations around the world. The foundations of these unique ecosystems have been impacted significantly by the rapid spread of the pandemic. Dr. Andrew White is the Associate Dean of Executive Relations and was previously the Associate Dean for Executive Education and Corporate Relations at the Saïd Business School, University of Oxford. In that position, he was responsible for forging connections between the research, resources, and expertise of the school and of the wider university, with senior leaders in companies and organizations throughout the world. He was responsible for leading the development and delivery of custom, open, and accredited executive programs which serve as a primary platform for the school's communication with those facing the demands of leadership in the 21st century. Dr. White has recently been appointed the director of the Oxford Advanced Management and Leadership Program, part of the university's executive education program, ranked second in the world by Financial Times. Dr. White, I want to welcome you to the program today. I'm very excited and encouraged that you had some time to talk with us.
It's great to be with you, JR. A pleasure to see you again, and I just wish it could be in the flesh, but in the current situation, this is a wonderful way of reaching out and still staying communicating.
Absolutely. I would much rather be sitting on the other side of the room than the other side of the world. I just talked about a little bit of the impact that this pandemic has had on colleges and universities. Well, it's kind of changed everything from the way we present classes to the way that it impacts finances with higher costs, lower revenues, with admissions and everything else. Let's start today by talking a little bit about your background. I'm interested in hearing a little bit about your story and how you kind of got to the place where you are now. I know that you have just changed positions in the business school at Saïd. And so talk to us a little bit about your story.
That's great, JR. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. So let me give you a quick bit of history and then focus more on where we are today, which I think will be more relevant to your audience. So I started life in a research role, looking at innovation and where successful ideas came from for new products and services. I quickly then moved into executive education within the business school I was then working in. This was about 15 years ago. Really enjoyed teaching executives, working with executives, bringing theory and research to the things they were struggling with and the opportunities they had. I then moved to Oxford about 15 years ago and began life there running leadership programs for people from all over the world. And within 5 years, I was the Associate Dean looking after all of the executive education work we did there. I did 2 terms of 5 years. And then just before just at the end of last year, I stepped down after those 2 terms to focus on something else. So I'm now the director of the Advanced Management and Leadership Program, which is the flagship open program at Oxford, which you were an attendee on a few years ago. 40 people from about 35 countries, runs twice a year, really focused on what it means to be a 21st century leader. And that's what I'm going to be doing. I can talk a little bit more about how that's evolving given the pandemic. I'm also still in a leadership role in the school as the Associate Dean for External Relations, which is a smaller role, and it allows me to concentrate more on what I'm doing with that program. I'm also starting up a research activity, and I'll be very soon, I'll be launching a podcast series and a LinkedIn newsletter focused on what we're calling Leadership 2050. What are the leadership skills that are needed between now and 2050 to really make the world a successful place? So that's me in a nutshell.
That's very interesting. Sort of this eclectic mix of drawing on your experience and looking into the future, or stepping into the future. That's very good. Part of the reasons that I was interested to talk to you today is that I've been intrigued with the way that leaders handle crisis, and let me tell you that this pandemic has been the epitome of an unplanned event. It came at us quickly and with a little warning. I'm interested in hearing a little bit about your initial reactions to sort of the magnitude of this pandemic problem. What were you thinking?
If I go back, and it's just over a year now, I think certainly for me, it was a sense that the floor had fallen out of the world. And we knew we were falling, we just didn't know how far. And where had the floor fallen to that was going to catch us? And we saw an overnight shift in our world of having to teach online. We saw all of the global travel stop. We were so dependent on that, both for sending our faculty out to teach courses around the world, but also receiving people in Oxford. We also had the whole challenge of what do we do with the staff and the faculty, which are about 550 people. So there was that sense of where's the floor and how far are we going to fall? And I think we all saw stock markets, where was the floor on the stock markets as well? And that's quite interesting because that's dropped and then came back, certainly the US markets with quite some force. I think what I saw was there was far more resilience in the system than I think many of us thought. As a business school, we transitioned, as I say, almost over a weekend to teaching online and to getting people settled in at home with their home offices and all of that. And our IT team did an amazing job. Our estates team did an amazing job in terms of shifting to a different model and supporting people and getting them the kit that they needed. I think what took us a bit longer was to figure out when we needed to make some big investments, certainly for what I'm now involved in, our open programs, because people had signed up for an Oxford experience. So to go out to them and say, well, actually, you're not going to come to Oxford, but how do we still give you an Oxford experience? I think certainly over last summer, we didn't know when travel would come back. And I think we were hopeful it would come back in September. Then would it be in early 2021? So I think some things by force of necessity shifted overnight. Other things we waited. And then I think as it became clear that things weren't going to come back quickly, we then moved to a different model for some of our open programs. I can talk more about that because we've seen some quite interesting things develop there. And then just finally, we saw other bits of our model, which were, went off like rockets because we'd set up a digital platform 2 years earlier. We were teaching digital programs, and that, I would say, slightly wobbled revenue-wise for a month or so, I think, as the whole world went into a panic. But it kind of did this and then it went off. And that's really been a godsend for us because it's been the one part of the school which has been unaffected. We've managed to continue filming as we're filming, like we're filming today. and all the delivery is online. And that's just gone from strength to strength in terms of the recruitment onto the existing programs and the launch of new programs as well.
That's very good. There's sort of the serendipity of circumstance, isn't there? The fact that you had an initiative to put begin a digital process, a digital world, if you will, innovative, even though beyond what you probably first imagined that it was going to be.
Yeah.
And that became a strength, you said. I hear a couple of things that are very intriguing to me. One is that one of your first places that you went was to your people, to your faculty, to your students. That's very interesting, and rethinking existing approaches. One of the things within this that I hear from a lot of people and experienced myself is sort of this overwhelming characteristic of this crisis, where there's just not a change that you can identify and address. There's a complexity that is really unknown. You go from one day to another, and then almost the entire environment changes. When you began to see that, the scale of this thing, and the sort of this complexity and confusion, what was your approach? What was your strategy? How did you handle that?
I think the first thing we did as a school was make sure that our people were okay. And so at a practical level, that was ensuring that they were set up at home with the kit that they needed. Some of them, it was just simply Zoom calls and Microsoft Teams. Others, it was broadcast, and they needed proper quality cameras, microphones, and lighting, and that type of thing. But there was also a strong focus on well-being. Without coming to work every day, it's easy for people to feel isolated. So what I've been really impressed by is the creativity. We've even had our chefs do cook-alongs for people at home. So they send out the recipe, you buy the ingredients from the store, you come home, you set your laptop up in the kitchen, and you cook along with the chef. So we've been able to keep that social glue incredibly well. We've also, we were running, I think, 2 town halls every term, so 6 a year in the old world. Now we're running 1 every week. It's just a part of the ritual of people coming together. And again, ensuring that people aren't isolated. Like every organization, we've had people go down with COVID. So we've had to make sure that to the extent that we can, we're looking after them, their families. We've also had to put the testing regimes in place. We've also seen an increase in mental health issues, and how do we provide, again, to the extent that we can as an employer, care for those people who are going through difficult times. I think there's also been more, I would say, empathy for people in that, you and I are in nice workspaces. Some of my colleagues have got young children, particularly when the schools are shut here and the nurseries shut. It was very difficult for them to be on Zoom for 8 to 9 hours a day. So there was more understanding, I think, of some of those pressures, that we all had to just be kind to ourselves, and we had to give ourselves some breathing space to get through this. So I think there was a strong people element. There was another layer, which was, how do we adjust to the fact that some of our programs people are just not able to come to. So in a sense, the business model, I wouldn't say was dead, but was certainly temporarily suspended. And there, I think we've been much more thoughtful about how do we create a virtual experience. And this metric I'm going to give you doesn't work for all programs, but a typical one of our open programs recruits 40 people. There have been some cases where the class that we've recruited for the virtual experience, only 30% of those participants signed up for the on-campus experience. So what that's saying to us is, by going virtual, and by virtual we mean live broadcast, we're attracting a whole group of people that hadn't thought about coming to Oxford, wanted a live experience rather than a pre-recorded digital experience, which they can get through the other channel. And so it opened up another market segment. And these are people who, for work reasons, family reasons, visa reasons, financial reasons, can't travel to Oxford, but still want to have the program experience. So it's left us with a question: do we keep that? And I think it's still a question for us. But I'll go on to talk about, that actually I think there could be more value in this, or different value, let me say, in coming to an on-campus experience.
That's good. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. I, as an alum, I'll say I have been very much impressed because I have been able to get access to programming that I never would have gotten access if I had to get on a plane and fly to come to Oxford to sit in a room. And it has a lot to do also, I think, with the market's perception of the school, the market's perception of the program, in that you did something you mentioned before, which I think is very wise, and that is you sort of looked at the resources that you had and figured out how they could be adapted to a new environment. Quite honestly, that is a skill that sometimes escapes leaders.
Yeah. And I think, let me give you a concrete example here of two things we did. One is, very quickly, we pivoted and set up this thing called Leadership in Extraordinary Times. I think we recognized the world needed the content we had. We had some great content that could help the world. So we did a series of, and we're still doing a series of online seminars, which are free. And we get anything from 500 to well over 1,000 people regularly attending these. And as you say, you don't need to fly to travel. You can access by various different platforms. It's the first thing we did. The second thing we did, and it's the program that you went on, the Advanced Management and Leadership program. This is a 3-week intensive program. And to a person, everybody I've spoken to who's been on that program has said it will never work digitally. Now, we're then in a position where, well, we can't make it work physically. So how might we make it work digitally? So this is what we've done. We've taken the 3 weeks. We take the first 2 weeks and we create a 10-week intervention that runs from May of this year through until the beginning of July. So you have classes every Tuesday and Thursday. You also have some of the case studies that you did. We're weaving them in on some of the other days. So you can still work. You can still have family life with friends to the extent that you can in the COVID situation. And it's a more elongated process. You then, between July and October, when you come for a week on campus, and let me talk more about that in a moment, you go and do stuff. So you learn for 10 weeks, then you go and do stuff. You then come to Oxford for a week in late October for 7 days, have the full Oxford experience, the wonderful dinners that you had, the late nights discussing case studies from different participants, the graduation ceremony. So we put the things we felt couldn't be done virtually then. So this leaves me with a question, and I don't know, I'm going to have to wait and see, is you had a fantastic 3-week experience, but you were kind of taken out of the world, intense Oxford experience put back into the world. That's a certain learning process. There's this other learning process where you have 10 weeks of digital study. You have an opportunity to go and implement something. During that time, you have coaching, you have support. You then come to Oxford, you can review that implementation, and you can get more inputs. So I don't know which one's going to have the best impact in terms of learning. I genuinely don't know. Maybe they are different types of learning. Maybe it's different structures that work for different people. I certainly don't think that the virtual experience is, let's say, the poorer sibling of the on-campus, the 3-week on-campus experience that you had. I think there's something really quite interesting there. Time will tell. And this is where we may have inadvertently created something which is more accessible, which is a more embedded learning experience, which doesn't require you to take 3 weeks out, which can be prohibitive for some people. only requires you to take 7 days out. And maybe people start to say, well, actually, that's a better thing for me because it gives me a chance to more slowly move through the content, go and implement something, and still have the support of my participants and Oxford while I do that. So I think it's opened up a really interesting question for us. This is no longer an either or. It could well be a both and we could end up running both models in the future to give people that choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very good. I would call that brilliant wisdom. If I were going in it again, I would want both.
Yeah.
There's something about what I would call this building of a direct dialogue culture. Those 3 weeks really bind a group of people. I speak only for my cohort. After 7 years, since we went through that program, some of us still talk on almost a daily basis. We have little online groups that we're continuing discussions, and I think that the value of the remote is also there.
Mm-hmm.
If there was one other thing that I might have added into my experience was to have a more structured application to my daily life. And it seems to me like what you're talking about right now might fill that bill. I would think, though, that the camaraderie that's get built in, whether it's done in 7 days or if it's done in 3 weeks, is also an invaluable part of this, because I know that the group of people that we had really formed a bond, which kind of can't happen if you're forcibly separated, like we had. I'm sure you worked pretty extensively with your team of folks. I'm interested to hear you talk about some of the things you already talked about, but this sort of time, procedure, communications piece. It seems to me to be like being hit with a fire hose. It's just so much coming at you at once. How do you do that? How do you handle that? Comments on that?
Well, I think what it is genuine crisis management, isn't it? And most of us in leadership roles, we do change. We implement a new IT system, or we do a restructuring, or those of you in business, you do an acquisition or a merger. But these things have a certain cadence about them. You bring consultants in, or you do a review. You take that through various committees. There's various people that look at it. This was a different type of change. This was on Friday, the world's going into lockdown, and there is a group of staff and faculty and students on our degree programs who are expecting content on Monday. So there's no time to do a big review. It's about action. And so it's a different approach to change. It's certainly over those early weeks and months back in March of last year. And I think that did a lot of organizations a lot of good. I think it was painful, it was difficult, but I heard comments in other industries like, we made more progress in 3 months with our digital agenda than we would have made in 3 years. It's forced us to move so much more quickly. And, if you just look at the technologies we're using today, they've become second nature. And we've all become much better at using these. I coach CEOs in some of my private time, and I coach a number of them I've never met. And we have deep and profound conversations through this medium. And I probably never will meet them, yet it doesn't matter. There comes a point in a conversation where I don't think it's different from face to face. Yes, you don't have the same sense of being with somebody, but when you start to get deep into the conversation, I would struggle to say it's any different. Are we in a different place now than we would be if we were in your nice study in the US or in a room in Oxford? I don't think so. We're having a great conversation. And this technology is only going to get better. If you think about the business case for the dollars and the pounds and the euros and the yen and the RMB in China, that it has been created for this. I suspect in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to be sitting in something close to full virtual reality. And so in the same way, if you and I had this conversation 10 years ago, we would have both had to spend I think it was $500 million, or certainly a lot of money on Cisco telepresence, maybe not as much as that. It was $100 million. Sorry, forgive me, it was $100 million on Cisco telepresence. If you look now, we're on a $200 subscription to Zoom. So the world's move on, and therefore, how will we be communicating in 5 or 10 years' time? So I think it's given us a necessary shove into this world. Absolutely. That we're all going to be operating much more in.
Absolutely, yeah. I like to call it, we're forced into the future.
Yes.
This is the future we've been talking about for a decade. Yeah. And it took this crisis to get us there. The way we work is changing, just as you're talking about right now. The way that we communicate, the way that we work together. You look at the workforce itself is changing. These companies who now are probably not even going to open up some of their physical facilities anymore, because they found out that doing it this way actually is more profitable, is better for them, is more better performance, more efficient. It's also going to change the way we lead. You have some thoughts about how is it going to change the way that we're going to have to lead in this sort of new world?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing which I think there is a risk that happens is, and it builds off one of the things you said. So hitherto, most people have worked for organizations that they could commute to. So they've lived somewhere between 50 meters to 500 meters to 5 miles to 50 miles. And sometimes, if it's a big commute, 100 miles. Going forward, they've certainly been in the same country. Going forward, that's not as necessary. Now, we saw outsourcing of functions to other continents. I wonder whether we're going to see more jobs. So you're running a team in the US, and you're employing me in the UK, someone else over here, somewhere else over here, somewhere else over here. So that sense of locality, well, certainly I think tax-wise, it's problematic to employ people outside the jurisdiction that you're in. But, that could adjust, and there's probably ways around it by setting up small operating companies elsewhere. So, and I'm not sure that will necessarily be a good thing. So that's one thing. Now, what that means is, I think, is how do you operate in that digital world? There are also other forces that I see where, global trade is becoming politicized. Countries, I think, I wouldn't say globalization is over, but there are certain tensions that are there. And what does that mean for the international way, or the ease of international work that's happened in the past? And so I don't have answers there in terms of which way that will go. In some ways, this technology makes things a lot easier, but how do you introduce yourselves to people when you've never met them? And will technology actually start to facilitate that? To me, at the moment, it's very good at managing existing relationships. How does it create new relationships and new business? So I think we're in, and then you throw into that climate change and all of the ways in which corporate travel, I think, is going to be affected by that. I think we're in for another 5 or 10 years of real disruption and transformation in various industries.
That is very true. There's so many unknowns in here. I think of the change in the workforce being fairly dramatic. I also think that the idea of leadership is going to have to change a lot. I see that this kind of a model could become the great equalizer or a major source of inequity also around the world. You comment on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably one of the biggest issues we face. And it's whether capitalism, I mean, I'm a capitalist, but I can see it's a model that's under stress. And unless capitalism works for the overwhelming majority of people, it starts to be it seeds the source of its own destruction. And different countries will approach that in different ways. But I think that's one of the biggest challenges that leaders face. And in some ways, it's not just about who you employ. That's important, but it's not the full necessity of it. It's also about the broader society, because you can have a great company, but if it's in a society that's tearing itself apart because of inequalities and a strong perception that wealth is not being distributed in a fair way, well, we only have to look at history to know how that can sometimes turn out. So I think this is one of the things that business needs to really think about. And what is an optimal decision at the micro level can be very suboptimal at the macro.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's really important that we continue to identify and grow leaders, isn't it?
Well, also, and it's not just leaders in the private sector. If you think about governments had a resurgence over the last year, and the importance of government.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The private sector was not enough, and we've seen where the governments get it right in terms of some of the vaccine rollouts that are going very well in certain countries. It's a real testament to what good government looks like and how government should be. So, how governments will come out of this, I think, is another really interesting question. And will they see themselves as being much more proactive and interventionist, which is not where they were, certainly 20 years ago, with a more liberal free market type approach.
Yeah, it's very interesting to look at leadership in government around the world, and how different approaches, though sometimes similar, were managed by a leader to make them much, much more effective than in other places. And I find that revelatory, not just for government, but for business also. I think being a transitional leader is one that needs to listen and be flexible. And I think that becomes a big piece of it.
And not need to know that they have all the answers.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that they've got all their solutions. And, sometimes those solutions take a long time to develop. And often it's about holding space for them.
Yeah, and so here we are. We're now in an environment. Britain is doing very well with its vaccination, and it sounds like you're beginning to ease up some of the restrictions. Other countries are getting vaccinated. Some aren't. Some hopefully will soon. And we might. I shouldn't probably say this out loud, but we might be coming to the last part of this particular crisis. Talk to me a little bit about some of those lessons that we should learn out of this.
Yeah, I think the first thing I've learned, certainly over the last year, is never call it as being over. Because I wasn't fully there back in September last year, but I was very hopeful. And so I think I'm much more sanguine about the fact that we could be on a roller coaster. And it's over when the evidence really shows that. And it's over when when the world gets over it, particularly if global travel opens back up. It's not,
make yourself an island for a while, as the UK is doing at the moment. But if you've got problems in continental Europe or the US or other major trading partners, people will start to flow. People want to go on holiday. You can't isolate yourself in that way. So I think one enduring thing that leaders need to look at is, certainly for the next few years, staying with this sense that the planning foundations are going to be unstable. And how do you create resilient delivery, resilient operations, despite that lack of stability? So if I go back to my example of what we've done with AMLP, that would be a good reason to have these two options. Have this virtual model and have this on-campus model. So we can pivot. And so in a sense, if they are like muscles in the human body, we don't allow the muscle to atrophy. We allow it, we keep it exercised. So we've got that ability to work in different ways. So I just think that's, there's a real skill there about not making too many assumptions, keeping that resilience and that agility in the operating models that we have. The bigger societal questions that we were just focusing on, and recognizing that there is just ever more innovation, and therefore, fostering that creativity, fostering that innovation, that entrepreneurial capability, particularly in large organizations and older organizations where it's often more challenging, is going to be really, really important.
Very, very salient points. Very, very salient. The idea that maybe I hope I'm not breaking the news to you, but this will not be the last crisis that we face. And your approach and approach of I would call them good leaders is that you work on building a system that can handle all kinds of symptoms.
Yes.
And if you do that, you really stand at a better place to meet anything. I hear in your conversation part of that being how important your people are, whether they're your faculty and staff and students or customers or whatever, that accessibility that you have to have. And one of the pieces that I really appreciated you bringing out was this idea of rethinking your approach, using those resources that you have to create other approaches, other procedures, other ways of doing it. That really is about how you build and maintain a stable system.
Yeah.
And it sounds to me, my observation here is that there is a stable system in place. Do you have any other things, any other final things that you would like to bring out here about leadership or encouragements to leaders or anything you might have?
And the only other thing I would say, which I think is changing, is that the weight of responsibility on leaders has only got higher. Mm-hmm. And therefore, a capacity to think deeply about the world in which we're operating, the people that we're responsible for, the systemic consequences of the decisions that we make has, I think, only become more important. And it's no longer for many leaders possible to operate in isolation or ignorance of the broader world in which their organizations are having an impact.
That big word, accountability, is very important, isn't it?
Well, particularly when you're controlling hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars of capital, lots of people's lives within the organization, customers, and how do you How do you manage all of that in particularly in this Zoom world and this Teams world of things being much more fragmented? How do you keep cultures together and induct people into cultures? These aren't easy things.
Yep. Yeah. It certainly will be interesting to watch what happens, and not just watch what happens, but be a part of what happens.
Exactly.
So, Andrew, I have been both encouraged and excited by your insight and your conversations today. I thank you very much for taking the time to talk with me, and I hope that we will be able to continue to observe coming out of OAMLP and out of Oxford, especially in its open programs. Those are the ones that I am enamored with anyway. Some very innovative and impactful content and programming.
Yeah, we're doing our best to do that, JR.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you too. Great to see you.
Thank you for listening. If you would like more information on leadership in a changing world, look for J.R. Klein's Oxford University Press published books on global business wherever books are sold. J.R. Klein is available for conversations about socially responsible business and inclusive capitalism. If you are interested in contacting us, call JR Global on 01 614 526 9118.